Yeah, thank you so much, Surya, and a pleasure to be talking to all the attendees. I understand this is a very, I would put it, intense time in terms of webinars and Zooms and all that, and so I'm even more appreciating the attendance and participation today. And I hope we really won't disappoint you with the conversations and that we will be having with each other and with you. I hope my presentation is being shared now.
Yes.
Is that okay? Thanks so much, Surya. Also, I will try to, and I think what I will be talking about will dovetail nicely with what you were saying. Perhaps sometimes be taking a bit more abstract position on the trends that we are seeing now, but also giving some examples and some practical work that we have started based of NextGen Gov Asia initiative. So just to give you, I think one of the things to say is just about the Regional Innovation Center that UNDP has set up in Bangkok, and that covers the whole Asia and the Pacific. Our team is looking to take innovation to the next stage, at least inside of our organization. And in terms of our partnership with the government, that being said, we mostly focus on policy transformation. We believe the most important issues that the region and even the world is facing today are really transformative, be it urbanization, plastic pollution, and others. Respectively, what we are trying to do is to drive policy transformation, not random or isolated innovation projects. And obviously for this, we are looking at supporting two key things as underpinning the policy transformation work. One is capabilities. Surya was talking about some of the competencies and skills that the public sector requires. Here are some of the things that we are investing in, not all of them, but some core capabilities that we are trying to build across the region with our country offices and with some of the governments. And obviously what we are trying to build is kind of a learning community around that, where there is really a regional platform of people who are working on innovation, but not necessarily innovation focal points, but actually spreading it across across the organizations. So a couple of things. I think Surya mentioned the exponential growth, quite quick shifts that are happening in landscape. And I think this was very much rational when we started designing NextGen Gov back in 2019. And obviously key things that we are looking at is essentially the massive challenges that we face across the region and beyond. Very much an axis of economic growth, environmental degradation, digital disruption and participation. Those were quite important and already daunting for governments and for societies as such before COVID. So we were supposed to have summit, the first NextGen Gov Asia summit in March, and then COVID happened. Obviously, we had to repivot. And I think what happened, luckily or unluckily, COVID-19 actually both highlighted the importance of challenges that the governments had to look at, and that actually required policy transformation approaches than just looking innovation in a particular lab or in a particular unit of the government. But at the same time, also put kind of in a very comparative perspective, how different governments dealt with the pandemics, the first order effects, and obviously how they have started planning for the second order effect. So that kind of helped us to give a narrative for why we were wanting to do NextGen Gov after COVID. And I think there were four key elements in terms of rationale. So the first one was obviously we saw that too much in the governance conversation and the so-called best practice conversation was too Western focused, Western centric. And what we wanted to show is that Asia is capable of many innovations and can actually lead the way in terms of adaptation to COVID and post-COVID. The second thing was for us is that, as I mentioned before when I was talking about policy transformation, is that for us was very important to start shifting beyond quick fixes and solutions. If those structural weaknesses that led to COVID and were highlighted by COVID, like inequality, ecocide, environmental degradation, plastic pollution, and so forth, are really structural, then perhaps the role for innovation is less tactical, more strategic. And to think about what would be the approaches that would support governments, but also other players in societies to deal with those challenges. The third big thing, and I think this is something that is really important, I think 2020 also highlighted what is the innovation dividend, right? We were talking, and Surya was talking quite a lot about experimentation, and I think 2020 just highlighted this experimentation happening at speed and scale never seen before, right? So examples are ESA scheme on social protection in Pakistan, Bangladesh moving quickly to online education, not talking about like front runners in a way in transformation like Singapore, South Korea. There were a lot of innovations that have become possible overnight. For example, Indonesia was very apprehensive of telemedicine. Once COVID was there, it was legalized, it was supported and referred to by government. So so for us was very important. Okay, these are all innovations happening. What actually we can retain out of it, of this innovation dividend, as the world and as the region and governments will be dealing with the second order effects of the pandemics and trying to move into post-crisis mode eventually. And obviously the last thing, and this is to what this webinar is perhaps also serving, is how we would ensure that we would connect and build community of decision makers interested in this new, let's use the word exponential for this word exponential of innovation approaches in governance, and how we could build a community around that. So this was kind of a four things behind, a rationale behind the NextGen Gov summit. We had it in June, attended by senior decision makers, deputy ministers, senators, prime minister advisors, and so forth. And I think as the next steps, there were a couple of things. So one of the things was obviously sharing knowledge, but also understanding what are the key radical shifts that we are observing at this point of time in the region, and that influence governance and governments as such. Secondly, what we could do about it collectively with some of our NextGen Gov champions. Going to the shifts and looking beyond obviously important things like 3AA, anticipatory, adaptive, and so forth. I think what COVID did is actually gave a new legitimacy to experimentation, but also created much bigger ask. Are we actually able to do this at scale? And I think that this has created an important demand for innovative approaches, but at the same time, asking innovators actually to prove the point. And before I kind of refer to this in more detail when I will be talking in the kind of a shifts in statecraft from the government perspective, I would like to highlight perhaps three important change in parameters that we see in the governance landscape. So one of the things is obviously is about shift to more distributed governance, right? So it's not, we all understand that these challenges are not only to governments to resolve. There is important role for private sector, but also for communities. One of the examples is, for instance, the introduction of the first lockdown in West Java, biggest province, one of the biggest provinces in Indonesia, where actually the data model on prediction of the clusters and spread of pandemics was developed by a grassroots community-led team that actually communicated it to the government and informed the decision making. So what we see, I think, here and there in many places, as trust and communication between government has played such an important role, there is certain shift in understanding that our government need to release some of the attributes or some of the roles, but also capacities and skills that can be sourced from outside the government, be it private sector or civil society and communities. The second huge trend that we see, I think that there are important things around inclusion and equality that cannot solved only by technology. Quite the opposite sometimes. If not kind of taken care, technology can exacerbate some of the inequalities. And the second thing, which is no less important, this is not only about equality in the present generation. It's also about relationship between present generation and the future generation. So this is why, in a way, whatever will be happening in governance sphere and whatever government will be doing should perhaps start taking into account not only needs and concerns of the present generation, but start also looking into the ways how the concerns of the future generations can be factored in, right? At the moment, we have had some examples like Ministry of Future in Sweden, Committee of Future Generations in Wales, and so forth, right? So one of the things that potentially this trend we will see will be magnified, and more space will be given for future generation, as they have stakes in what is happening now. And the last thing is perhaps about rebalancing state and market. Obviously, the savoir du jour now is the big government, and to the extent that austerity measures were kind of forgotten, there is a massive bailout policy across the world, and governments are increasing spending on social safety nets, on supporting micro and small and medium-sized enterprises and so forth. But I think what is important here is not only fiscal space of the government, but also the direction, right? So if we really want to not just build back where we were before COVID, but want a very different future, then perhaps the government is someone who can help shape a very different direction through investment and through mission-driven policies that are being explored now in EU and some other places. So this leads to another point where we actually, okay, with all these trends, what we hear from many of our colleagues from the governments with whom we are working, to whom we are talking, and with whom we have had a series of webinars and virtual learning sessions around NextGen Gov, and with whom we are designing possible interventions about which I will talk later, I would say there are three important shifts, and they mostly, because we are talking to central government, they mostly relate to the center of the government. One of those is a next gen policy architecture, and what we are meaning here is essentially a very different way for the decision making. I think COVID very much highlighted the importance of real-time decisions being implemented at governmental capacity to take those decisions in real time. And I think this is something that is, for instance, we have seen in New Zealand, where the tactical urbanism became official strategy, and in parallel experimentation fund was set up to support citizens to come with new ideas and to support government in implementing those mechanisms. In Asia, we have example also from Bangladesh, where the the educational system was developed on the flight. Another important thing is obviously agile regulation, and Surya talked about it. I think one of the kind of a more exponential examples where the regulation of the future will go further beyond sandboxes is something called the rule as a code, where most of regulations and laws are written also in the machine readable language and can be iterated in the Go. So laws can be experimented in real time and then codified as such, right? So if you take, for instance, some examples of development of social safety nets on the go in a couple of South Asian countries, then perhaps if such system, agile regulation was already in place, the respective adjustment in the social safety policy would have happened automatically. We see now also the Employment and Social Services Department of Canadian government is experimenting exactly with the regulation as a code around social safety nets and looking at the way how different changes in entitlements can change the impact of the social safety. And obviously another thing which is very important is new ways of seeing. I think COVID again highlighted the curse of aggregates, where in the government or in organizations we use aggregate data to make decisions, and this obviously leaves beyond the cracks many people who don't fit well aggregates. But at the same time, I think where we lack is the usual statistical tools actually are not granular enough. We don't understand developments and trends on the ground among communities, and respectively, because of this, many policy interventions fail. Another one is what we call mission ministries, but this is essentially institutional innovation. What, for instance, we've seen, let's take example of EXAS in Pakistan. The existing digital infrastructure was very important, but to be able to activate it to support for the purpose of the COVID and start bringing different threads of social safety assistance to common databases, using mobile private sector partners, using communities and so forth, required a lot of intra-government and cross-sector organizations. So for us, the question is how we can really retain that agility of whole of the government, whole of society, when responding to these challenges, and to what extent we can have this mechanism deployed when we have a particular challenge to work on. The last thing would be a perpetual better service delivery. This is essentially continuously iterating on the service, public service delivery to the citizens. Again, I think many of you know, for instance, approach that is called Life of Moments event, a Moments of Life event, and so forth, that was deployed by Singapore, New Zealand, and some others. I think the question now, moving forward, how we can make it a new normal, and at the same time, how it can be augmented by AI, given that some of the users will be increasingly relying on AI support in making decisions about accessing services and so forth. So the last thing is that obviously how we land these important changes in the center of the government and where we want really to experiment with it on the ground. Here are three threads on which we're working now with our country offices and partners in the government. One is in Indonesia, where we should be starting soon with the Minister of Communication and Information on developing a digital transformation roadmap. Again, what we want to embed, again, relating to what Soraya was mentioning, how we embed experimentation, cross-government digital coordination as part of this process, how we from the onset really map out the required talent, both for the public sector and for the outside of public sector, and how we can really help it nourish, but also at the same time retain in the public sector, especially if we are talking about digital transformation. But I think what is also important here, how we can really build multidisciplinary teams around that. So I think, okay, 3 more minutes. The second thing, I have talked already about social welfare in Pakistan. Again, this is where the potential experiment will lead to exploration, how the government can look as a platform, in a way how we can bring all different social safety and welfare threads that are being delivered by different arms of the government onto one common platform, and to have a joint interface with citizens. The last thing is about future food security. We are working in 2 countries in India, in state of Telangana, in the Philippines at the national level. But what we will be looking at is how we can develop capabilities inside the government to be better anticipating the food security shocks, and how they can use data models to work for more, for fairer pricing mechanisms. And this work will be supported by our partnership with the Rockefeller Foundation on data-driven policymaking. So this is very short. We obviously can cover some other details at the Q&A. So I'm very happy to respond to that together with Soraya and be in touch with you. Thank you so much.